The reading from the Old Testament comes from the book of Ruth, chapter 1, verses 1 through 18. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to live in the country of Moab, he and his wife and 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of the wife Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem to Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of one was Orpah, and the name of the other was Ruth. When they had lived there for 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, so that the woman was left without 2 sons or her husband. Then she started to return with her daughters-in-law from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had had consideration for his people and given them food. So she set out from the place where she had been living, she and her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on their way to go back to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find security, each of you, in the house of your husband." And then she kissed them, and they wept aloud. They said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Do I still have sons in my womb, that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. Even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I should have a husband tonight and bear sons, would you then wait until they were grown? Would you then refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, it has been far more bitter for me than for you, because the hand of the Lord has turned against me." Then they wept aloud. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. So she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. And your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die. There will I be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, even if death parts me from you." When Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her.
Jan, thank you. Our gospel passage this day comes to us from the book of Mark. There in the 12th chapter, we read this day beginning at the 28th verse. One of the scribes came near and heard people disputing with one another. And seeing that Jesus answered them well, he asked him, "Which commandment is first of all?" And Jesus answered, "The first is, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these." And then the scribe said to him, "You're right, teacher. You have truly said that he is one, and beside him there is no other. To love him with all your heart and with all your understanding and with all your strength, to love one's neighbor as oneself, this is much more important than all whole burnt offerings and sacrifices. When Jesus saw that he answered wisely, Jesus said to him, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." After that, no one dared ask him anything. So end our lessons for this day. Have you ever had an occasion where a conversation, an experience that suddenly caught you off guard and made all of life make more sense than it ever had before? This week in Bible study, we were reading together the first book of Samuel. There, where Saul and David wrestle with each other, they're continually chasing after each other. Saul trying to eliminate David because he knows he's going to replace him as king. David trying to upset Saul so that he wouldn't be king. Each one believing that they knew best how to run the nation. Each one trying to eliminate the other. Each one trying to lead. Each one trying to be first. In the midst of the discussion, someone said, "But this is the change that happens from the book of Judges to the Kings. Being a king means you know what's right for everybody, and you lead." And suddenly it occurred to me that in the church, that's not how we do it. In 31 years as a pastor, in almost 19 as your pastor, I can't remember a time, and if so, please shame me, for ever having said, "I know what we need to do. Follow me." Because in the church, what we do instead is to listen to each other, to work together as the body in this place and time. What a pastor does do is to listen to the needs of the community, to listen to the needs in the congregation, and so to lead to fulfill those. But it's not about what I need or what I want. This was coupled on Friday going to the Y and seeing someone from the congregation who said, "How are you doing?" And I described him doing really well. All the physical therapy has gone well. It's recovered well. But what's really made a difference are all the people's prayers, and their cards, their phone calls, their visits, their dropping off food and other gifts to get us through this time. And she looked at me and sincerely said, "Well, we love you. What else would you expect?" As a pastor, there can be nothing more wonderful to realize and to know. Our culture is based on succeeding, on being the first, on being the winner, on being the one who gets it all. Because in this society and competition, one wins and everybody else is lesser. To know that you're loved, to know that you're part of the body, that's countercultural. The ancient Greek and Roman and Jewish cultures were very much like American culture in the idea of one wins and is the first in the culture. But they added to it even more because the one who was first also set the example. The one who is first becomes like the cornerstone. They're the one who lays down the parameters, who sets out what's going to be level and what's going to be the boundaries. They set the example that everyone else builds upon. So if our cornerstone is security, or our cornerstone is self-sufficiency, or our cornerstone is that we win, that sets up what's going to happen. And instead, Jesus described that the cornerstone is love. The cornerstone is faith. The cornerstone is compassion. And these are all part of one another. We've just been through a general election here in the village. It seems as though it's going to be the middle of February before we find out who actually won, because it was so close. And so we need to wait until all the ballots are counted, and we find out from the absentees who actually is going to lead. Listening to all the different politicians nationally and locally over the last many years, it seems as though each one has come up with a word as to what they want to be the foundation. It's either going to be Obamacare or anti-Obamacare. It's either going to be the economy or it's going to be taxes. Each of us has our word for what it's going to be. Jesus was asked, what word, what one out of all the commandments in the Bible, would you choose to be first? Now realize, in order to be faithful in Judaism, there are 615 different laws. 615 different things that you are supposed to do in order to be faithful, and 300 of them are thou shalt not, and 315 are thou shalt. If you are going to choose out of all the different commandments, out of all the laws, you know that you're going to offend somebody. In the last several chapters, Jesus has been asked, so what about divorce? What about taxes? And each of these, he responds, setting them on their ear. So here, the scribe has listened and come to understand Jesus is taking this to heart. And so asks him, which is the great commandment? And Jesus responds as any faithful Jewish person would. Something from the book of Deuteronomy called the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. And God only will you serve with all your heart, with all your might, with all your soul. But Jesus adds to it something that's never been there before. He also says, with your mind, so that it becomes with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your might. That religion is not simply about the law, not simply about following the rules, not simply about making the confessions when you've sinned and realizing you've done wrong, but instead using your mind. For the last 50 years in America, there has been an argument between evolution and creation. For the last 500 years throughout the Western world, there's been an argument between science and religion as to which one has the truth. It's been an argument of heat. It's been an argument of passion. It's not been an argument that's given much insight or light. Because if we are to use our minds, if we're truly to use our minds in our faith, then it's not simply about recitation of what we believe, not simply an affirmation of what others have said before us, but our struggling with how are we going to make a difference? How are we going to respond when our marriages are in trouble, when we lose our job, when we're downsized, when our children can't get a job? How are these acts of faith? And how will we believe? But Jesus also added another twist to this that had never been there before. When asked, which one of the commandments do you base it on? Jesus says, well, there's two. And on these two hinge all the laws and the prophets. Now, maybe Elimelech from Moab had at some point put two different things together, but in all the scriptures, there's only one at a time. And Jesus here says there's two on which hinge all the law and the prophets. Suddenly it occurred to me that every hinge has at least two hinges, sometimes three. If you only put one hinge on a door, the weight of the door is going to pull it out of kilter, and it's going to bind, and it's going to get stuck on the floor or in the door frame. But if you have two, then the two work together to hold everything in balance, to hold each other in true, so that it's not only about what is sacred, but also what is needed. It's not only about what is needed and what is popular, but what is faithful. We live in a time in our world where it's very easy, when life gets hard, to simply say, I give up. Let's get a divorce. The chances for the last 30 years have been greater to get divorced than they are to stay together. Right now, that seems to be changing a little bit. But what if? What if in the midst of our struggles, in the midst of our hardships, it wasn't simply about whether this is fun or whether this is good or whether others more attract me, but also what is my responsibility to God, to myself, to this other, and to all those who see? What is my responsibility? Not only about what is sacred, what is righteous, what is pure, but also what is needed. Those two are in balance, wrestling with each other, holding each other in tension, so that you can't do either one without the other. Suddenly we get this book of Ruth. The last several weeks, we haven't been reading, following along from the Judges to the wanderings into the land. We haven't been following the Gospels. We've been charged to read the book of Job. We've been charged to read the Apocrypha and the book of Revelation. But the book of Ruth comes to us from a time during the Judges, a time in which each person knew in their heart what they wanted to do, and they did it. And when they had done wrong, they then confessed to God, and their lives were turned around, and God forgave them. And they started out anew. I would confess to you that this passage is very precious to my family. Everyone's got a passage that they love more than anything else. It was the passage at your baptism, the passage at your confirmation that you were able to read, the passage at graduation, the passage on your wedding day. That becomes your passage that you remember and hold up for all of life. My parents were married late in life. They were 37 and 39 years of age. My father was a widower. He fell in love and got married and had 3 children, and his wife died. The organist in the church had fallen in love with her high school sweetheart. And the night of the wedding rehearsal, after the wedding rehearsal, before the dinner, she suddenly received a letter from the groom saying, "I can't go ahead with it." And years later, these two got together. The book of Ruth is not a passage about 18-year-old newlyweds, not about people who have no background, no problems. This is a passage about broken people, about people who've been through divorce, about people who've been left at the altar, about people who are widowers, those of us with cancers and broken bones, who come together to provide comfort and caring and commitment and love to each other. It's an ironic passage. In the book of Judges, in that time in which there is no king, in the promised land of Israel, the land flowing with milk and honey, there is a family of Israel who are experiencing famine. Famine so severe that they leave Israel, they leave Bethlehem of all places to go to a foreign place. Bethlehem of all places because the very name Bethlehem means breadbasket of the world. And there's no bread in Bethlehem. And they have to go elsewhere to find food. And they go far distant to Moab. And there this family, a husband and wife and their 2 sons, live. And the husband dies. So a question for you. When we're all grown up, when we're 20 or 40 or 60 or 80 years of age, and our parents die, are you now an orphan? Malin and Chilian suddenly don't have a father. Their family has changed. The head of the household is gone. And so they do what they have to do to survive. They choose Moabite wives, wives of a different race, wives of a different religion, wives of a different culture, wives of a different nationality. And they take them as their own, and they live together for 10 happy years. And then Malin and Chilian each also die. Now this family that was a husband and wife and their 2 sons and their 2 daughters-in-law is only Naomi and her 2 daughters-in-law, who are no longer related to each other. They are of different cultures, different religions, and Naomi decides she's going back to her people, to her religion, and leave them behind. What is family? What is religion? What is identity? It is not simply about blood. It is not simply about doing things the way in which they have always been done, but wrestling with what is sacred and what is needed, and how do these two fit together. We live in a precious, rare culture that has never been before in all human history. A place of freedoms, a place where people have died for those freedoms and risked their lives for them. But part of those freedoms include the First Amendment that give us the right of free speech. So even though my neighbor is going to say something that's going to offend me horribly, they're going to burn the flag, they're going to decry religion, they're going to say something that's going to turn my stomach, I would fight for their right to say it. Fight for their right to believe it. Because together we make this nation. Together we make this church. Together we are this community. And we're not that if we don't have that diversity. We are different hinges. We're not the same. Some are at the top, some are at the bottom, but together we hold each other accountable. Together we are the community of faith. Together we are the body of Christ. Together, all the law and the prophets hang on these two. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. God only shall you serve with all your heart, with all your might, with all your soul, and with all your mind. But the second is equal to it. Love your neighbor as you love your own life. Amen. Could we